Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this BVRLA seminar. You can see the title, Counter-Terrorism and DFT's Rental Vehicle Security Scheme. My name is Nora Leggett, and I'm Director of Member Services here at the BVRLA. Last week, Friday the 22nd of March, was the second anniversary of the Westminster Bridge terrorist attack. And it was the first of 3 terrorist attacks which saw the vehicle rental and leasing sector join the growing list of industries to have been directly targeted by terrorists. We'll be covering a number of areas in this seminar, but first of all, I'd like to say the webinar is being recorded and it'll be available on the BVRLA YouTube channel along with other BVRLA webinars that we've run this year. You can't participate verbally, but if you want to pose a question, you're most welcome to do so during our live webinar this afternoon. And you just need to chat in your, use the chat box. You can tell it's live. Use the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen and email in your question. You don't need to say who it's from. Just email in a question. And what we'll do is I've set aside about 10 minutes toward the end of the seminar where we can cover off any of those questions. If you do experience any technical issues, again, email those to us and we'll try and resolve them as we proceed. 2 years ago, on the 22nd of March 2017, 52-year-old Khalid Masood drove a hired Hyundai Tucson SUV vehicle. It was hired in Birmingham a couple of days earlier. He drove it into pedestrians on Westminster Bridge. 3 of those pedestrians were killed at the time, and a 4th died later in hospital. 32 others were treated for life-changing injuries. Masood rammed the vehicle into the gates of the Houses of Parliament. He then took 2 knives and fatally stabbed PC Keith Palmer, who was on duty outside the Houses of Parliament. Masood was shot by armed police and died of his injuries. The entire incident was over in 90 seconds. The rental vehicle was identified by that rental company by a fast-thinking member of staff, and within 14 minutes the hirer identified and action taken by the authorities. 2 more rental vehicle as weapon attack anniversaries will now follow in quick succession this year, and we can expect ever-increasing scrutiny on our rental and leasing operations. Let me just remind you of those incidents. On Saturday, the 3rd of June 2017, 3 men, a 27-year-old Briton, Kuram Butt, Rashid Redouane, and a 22-year-old Italian-Moroccan, Youssef Zagba, drove a Renault Master van bearing the livery of B&Q, a special service operated by Hertz, where DIY customers can hire vehicles by the hour, and which is unlocked remotely by a central reservations service. The vehicle was driven into pedestrians on London Bridge. 2 people were killed right away. Those perpetrators then abandoned an unused store of Molotov cocktails in the back of the van and, armed with large knives and wearing dummy suicide vests, randomly killed 6 more people in nearby Borough Market. The inquest for that event will open in early May. And then the final incident here in 2017 involving vehicles was when 47-year-old Briton Darren Osborne drove his hired Citroën relay van into a crowd of worshippers outside the Finsbury Park Mosque. Makram Ali, who'd been taken ill and was lying on the ground, was struck by the vehicle and he died soon afterwards. 11 other people received hospital treatment. These are brutal examples of just how easy it is for extremists and terrorists to misuse rental cars, trucks and vans, turning them into instruments of terror. And it has the effect of putting the spotlight on our sector, and though that spotlight in turn leads to calls for crackdowns and greater scrutiny of our renting procedures and policies, and the pressure is on from government, police and the counter-terrorist authorities. As an industry, we really must demonstrate our determination to improve our operational procedures and where they need improving. And that includes the way we train and communicate with staff, how we serve our customers and how we manage our vehicle assets. Adherence to the BVRLA Code of Conduct goes some way of demonstrating that commitment. Another is to sign up to the DFT's UK Vehicle Rental Security Scheme, RVSS for short. So the aim of this webinar this afternoon is to provide some context and insight into the threat that we are facing and the measures that we would like our members to take in order to mitigate that threat. We want more of our members to sign up to the DFT's RVSS scheme. And this is what we'll be covering this afternoon. I'd like to talk briefly about the threat landscape. It's true to say that the principal threat comes from Daesh, also known as ISIS, and from Al-Qaeda, groups and individuals either enabled or inspired by them. Western-backed forces are claiming victory in Syria and Iraq. But as ISIS territorial grip weakens, terrorist leaders are turning their attention to encouraging their supporters to launch attacks in their home countries. So instead of calling foreign fighters to join them in Syria, the so-called caliphate, ISIS leaders are inciting their followers to attack the infidels in their homes, their marketplace, on their roads and in their forums. However, as we've seen in Finsbury Park and in the most recent attack in Christchurch, New Zealand, terrorism is no longer an Islamist phenomenon. And we really must get to grips with this, because as the UK National Police Chiefs Council published quite recently, the extreme right accounted for about 8% of those arrested for terrorism-related offences, and almost 1/3 of referrals on the government's PREVENT programme are people feared to have extreme right-wing views that could turn to violence. Now, in the UK, it's thankfully very difficult to get hold of this sort of firepower, and getting access to explosives is also very difficult, likely to promote suspicion. But it is terrifying to think that an extremist or a terrorist only needs a driver license to arm himself with a rental vehicle which can be just as deadly as these firearms in this caption. At this current moment in time, the threat from international terrorism, primarily, as I've said, from Islamic State, is severe, which means that an attack is highly likely. The threat level, by the way, is set by the Joint Terrorism Centre, JTAC, and is published for all to see on the MI5 website. The threat level is based on known intelligence, and although they don't have any set expiry date, they are regularly reviewed to ensure they remain current. This threat level is current. The scale of the international terrorist threat facing the UK is unprecedented. MI5 confirms that it's running approximately 500 investigations into individuals and groups associated with Islamist terrorism, and their caseload involves what they call high-risk individuals, those typically terrorist-trained or attempting to procure weapons and the means to carry out a terrorist attack. On top of those, there's about another 3,000 subjects of interest on their radar. And then there's a further larger pool, a much larger pool of something like 20,000 individuals who have previously been subjects of interest. And you can imagine that keeping track of, assessing and applying proportionate investigative resources on this number of individuals is an extremely challenging task for the intelligence and security community. Sajid Javid, our Home Secretary, in his contest paper, called upon the vehicle rental industry to play its part, and we are intending to do so. This is an example of the powerful messaging that international terrorist organizations have advocated. And analysis of terrorist literature, of which this is an example, shows that commercial vehicles are certainly the preferred weapon of choice. And that's due to their large size, weight, and carrying capacity. They know that such a vehicle can inflict greater damage against people and property. And of course, commercial vehicles are also plentiful and routinely arouse no suspicion when they're parked in crowded or public spaces. So, before I call upon our expert speakers to join me in this webinar, I'd just like to remind everyone that with BVRLA members responsible for over 5 million vehicles within the UK, and our short-term vehicle sector managing in excess of 500,000 cars, vans and trucks, and they operate from car club bays, from city centre locations, from suburbs, industrial estates, vehicle dealerships, from ports, from airports and from railway stations. It is, in our view at the BVRLA, entirely appropriate that the UK government looks to the BVRLA and its members for an industry-led approach to the problem. I'd now like to call upon Terry Egan, who's the DFT Head of Strategy, International and Vehicles team, to tell us something more about the DFT scheme and how it can affect the industry. Terry, thank you.
Thank you, Nora, and good afternoon, everybody. I'll quickly run through the rental vehicle scheme 10 points code of conduct to start off with, and then I'll do my best to try and sort of give some background context as well as we go along. So as you'll see on the screen here, we've worded the presentation very, very slightly differently from what's actually in our supporting guidance, which you'll notice. But we've done that for ease of explanation as part of the webinar process. So if we start off, appointing, number one there is appointing a named security contact and have a security plan. Now the idea behind this is we will actually at the DFT administer a register of companies that have signed up to the scheme. And on that register we will have the contact details of the recognised security contact and hopefully deputy as well. Now the idea behind this is to be able to sort of share security information with named individuals in companies and also to have a conduit for those individuals to be able to contact DFT directly if necessary, should they have any concerns. We'll go on to the second point of training staff to identify and report suspicious behaviours. Again, there is some BVRLA and ACT training available on this, which we can discuss a little bit later. We go on to support law enforcement counter-terrorism communications campaigns. Now, currently, the main campaign is ACT, is Action to Counter-Terrorism, which hopefully you'll be aware of. We'll be speaking a little bit more about those various different government campaigns a bit later on in the webinar. Participate in data and information sharing when requested. Now, this is where we work with the police and various law enforcement agencies to have a system in place where if you do have any information that you feel that should be passed on during the course of your sort of transactions during the day, that there is a system in place, a clear system for your staff to be able to report any suspicions through to the ACT support line. Training staff in DPA and GDPR data protection legislation, making sure that we actually do things as we should be doing and everything that we do is done in a legal context. Based on risk assessment, looking at when vehicles are procured, just taking a little bit of a view on what sort of security technologies are available on vehicles and, if appropriate, have them fitted to the fleet. More information is available on all of these points in our supporting guidance, which is available on our website, which I'll speak about in a moment. One of the more practical things we thought about was when vehicles are disposed of, ideally the company logos and livery should be removed before the vehicles are sent to auction or sold on. A lot of your companies are trusted brands, trusted names. That can be an issue if those vehicles are actually in the hands of hostiles. When it comes to checking out commercial vehicles, as you will appreciate, there are some specific risks involved here with the payloads and capacity that these vehicles have. So we have included in our guidance a security questionnaire. I won't speak too much about this at the moment because I know that my colleagues Barry and Rob have got some comments on this procedure a little bit later on, which are very interesting. Very importantly, customer-facing staff, front-of-house staff, when checking driver licenses and checking credit cards and what have you, it's important that they match up those two documents and include it in the actual scheme, i.e. the actual purchase transaction, that there is a credit card or debit card involved in that. We really don't think that cash is an advisable way of accepting any form of payment. It may be a part payment, depending on how your organisation operates, but we feel there should be a sort of a traceable transaction in the procurement process. So if we go on to the next slide, you'll see that the aim of the scheme is to reduce the risk of rental vehicles being used in terror attacks, as Nora discussed earlier on. We've designed the scheme really focusing on deterrence, awareness and security culture. Deterrence, i.e. putting systems in place that are business friendly, we hope, that aren't too burdensome on the operations, but are sufficiently robust that if a hostile was looking at potentially hiring a vehicle, any company that signed up to the scheme, they would be able to see what measures those companies put in place to ensure that their vehicles are secure and the process of renting those vehicles is secure. So in raising awareness of staff, particularly when it comes to situational and suspicious behaviours, that is another key part of the scheme, as is improving the general security culture within the industry. It's good. It's been focused on criminality in the past, which is understandable, but we need to involve the CT risks now, unfortunately. So the actual scheme itself, the benefits of the scheme, suitable for all types of rental operations, not just those customer-facing or retail outlets. We have a form of associate membership, companies that aren't actually directly involved in the handover of the keys, shall we say, at the front of house. So any organisation that has an interest in the rental scheme, it can be insurance companies, leasing companies, we would like to be able to involve them in the security scheme in general. So that's why if you cannot produce a security plan as such because you don't have any vehicles, that shouldn't prevent you from being registered onto the scheme. We have supporting guidance available, which is easily available on the well, it's not the DFT website, it's the .gov website. If you basically Google the DFT rental vehicle security scheme, it will bring up the application process document, which includes a declaration, and it will bring up the guidance and a pro forma security plan that you would send in to us that we can have a look at to make sure that your systems are suitably robust. As part of that sort of offer from us to industry, or DFT to industry, we will carry out initially some assurance visits, and we will supply guidance to companies as well. The assurance visit can be on site. We've done several in the past recent weeks, which have been very interesting, and we intend to continue with that over the next sort of 6 months.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Terry. That's very interesting, and I'm sure that everyone tuned in to our webinar this afternoon will have some questions for you on the scheme and how it operates. Can I remind everyone on that all they need to do is email their questions into the chat box in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. So far we've talked about the theory of the RVSS scheme. I'd now like to invite Rob Hardman, General Manager, County Car and Van, to join us, and he will tell us about RVSS in practice. Rob, are you there?
Thank you, Nora, and I join you today from sunny Stockport. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so let's dive into RVSS in practice. Well, a little bit of background about us, I suppose. We've been in rental for 30 years. We've got 5 branches across the northwest and small teams in every branch. And one of the good things about RVSS for us was that we wanted to, in addition to the BVRLA Code of Conduct, really gain some assurance that we were operating to best practice in terms of the new counter-terrorism landscape as well. So what does RVSS mean for a company of our size? Well, obviously we wish to continually improve the security of our business for both our people and our metal. Looking at the incidents from 2017 with shock and revulsion, we absolutely wanted to ensure that, as far as is possible, county vehicles were not involved and taken advantage of by would-be attackers. But also, what we found with using this scheme is that there is still a lot of parallels with anti-fraud measures that we wish to undertake and enhance as well. Now, in terms of what RVSS does for us, it provides that additional level of assurance that, in addition to the BVRLA Code of Conduct, we're also adhering to better recommendations directly from UK government. It's giving us access to that security advice today, and most importantly, as the threat landscape changes, tomorrow as well. And it provides a mechanism for UK government to quickly establish comms with us in the event of an incident, but also vice versa. And that was something that was really important for us. I think it's worthwhile mentioning a few things that RVSS isn't, because as with any new scheme, there can be some myths that are built up in the first days. So RVSS is not the UK government expecting your rental staff to be able to identify terrorists as terrorists. It's not about UK government imposing prescriptive regulation on how you need to conduct your own operations. And it's not expensive to implement. It's been designed very specifically to be scalable both up and down for rental companies of all sizes. It hasn't been, in our experience, complicated or unrealistic to use in practice. And in fact, this scheme wasn't dreamt up by people who have nothing to do with vehicle rental, but rather it was very much a coming together of the industry and government to say, this situation cannot go on, we must do something about it, but we want to do so in a very practical way. So no matter what size of rental business you currently operate, and I realise that some of you on the line today will be owners, potentially sole owner operators, you should find that the RVSS will work for you. And I think it's important also to say that you don't need to be a BVRLA member or United Rental Group licensee to join the scheme, although if you are a BVRLA member and you're adhering to the BVRLA Code of Conduct, you will naturally find adhering to RVSS easier than otherwise. So, how do you go about implementing it within your company? Well, once again, I'm not going to provide scripted guidance and tell you how to run your business, but I will tell you how we did it at County. First of all, it was very important to engage stakeholders at the top of the business, so whether that be owners, directors in our cases, and other senior management. We appointed a single person as our recognised security contact, and we also appointed a deputy as well. And we did that in such a way that the deputy and the lead contact will actually not be on annual leave at the same time. And that's something that each of them undertook as part of their responsibilities. Although, if it does ever happen, we've got a fallback position that we can rely upon as well. And in terms of our deputy, they're not a board member of the business, but they are appropriately senior. So in our case, they were a member of senior management. It's easy to download the guidance, and as Terry mentioned, apply online. I found the easiest way was to go on the uk.gov website and type in RVSS. The first thing to do when you do that is familiarise yourself with that 10-point code of practice. And then think about how that code of practice can be integrated within your business, and that really is the beginning of your security plan, or in the documentation it's known as Annex C. So we discussed the scheme and we agreed the contacts at the senior level within our business. And working through the 10-point code, we worked with our IT and various people in operations to identify where some of our processes would require some change. And these were then reported as recommendations to senior level and documented into our security plan. And it was very much decided early on that, as I mentioned, the integration of RVSS into our business would have a counter-fraud emphasis first and foremost, and then bring in the CT aspect alongside it. And we did that for a couple of reasons. The most principal reason was that some of our own staff at front desk were a little bit nervous and reticent about this idea of having to be some sort of counter-terrorism officer. And by relating our training back to incidents with fraud rather than with terrorism, i.e. incidents that they could and had related to in the past, we found it was easier to get them on board into the spirit of vigilance that we were looking for. So where did we specifically need to improve? Well, a couple of things that sprang to mind. One was payment handling. So we eliminated, by our own choice, and again this was a counter-fraud measure, we eliminated cash from our business approximately 10 years ago, and checks went the way of the dodo back in 2012. But some of our bookings today, as will be the case with many of your businesses, were made and paid for online. So we needed to implement a way for the rental agent to verify that the person who then appears at the desk to pick up the vehicle was indeed the person who paid for the booking, and we did that by card presentation and verification of the last 4 digits. So that was a specific mitigation that we put in our security plan documentation. The other element was training our staff to identify and report suspicious behaviours. And in this instance, we very much leveraged the training available through BVRLA and Action Counter-Terrorism to lead a seminar to discuss the various procedures involved. So every member of staff undertook the Act Awareness learning online, and the training is available and designed to be completed that way. And we immediately followed that with a group seminar led by myself or another senior member of the business to discuss some of the things that they had seen and how they could be related to what they may encounter at the front desk in the course of their job. But we didn't just include rental agents. We included everyone in the company, and particularly with particular emphasis to frontline members of staff. So it's not just about your rental agents being vigilant, it's about your handover agents actually delivering or checking the vehicle out to the customer, also having that training and being just as vigilant and part of that communication chain. For commercial vehicles, the Code of Practice lays down some specific requirements in terms of questions to ask. This for hirers without an operator's licence, and I think that's an important element of scope to mention at this point. The RVSS is designed to specifically target your non-corporate customers. So this is anyone who doesn't deal with you on a corporate account basis. For us, we like the questions that we were being asked to implement for commercial vehicles, and we like them enough that we decided to simplify matters for our front desk by implementing those questions for all vehicles as appropriate. And we did this not in the form of a questionnaire, but in the form of a natural conversation. And as the conversation proceeds, our rental agent fills in the form as appropriate. By not asking 20 questions, but by simply being nosy and friendly, as we call it, we learn where our customer's going with our vehicle, what they plan to do with it, and why the trip is necessary. And as I say, by gathering the information naturally, rather than with repeated robotized questions, genuine customers feel at ease, but disingenuous customers actually have quite a difficult time with it. We implement some other things that are easy to do with genuine customers as well. For example, we make sure that at the beginning of the presentation at the desk, we take all their ID documentation off them. We then ask them as part of the process to confirm their details, and this is trivial for genuine customers. During the conversation, whether on the phone, but ideally also at the front desk, we're looking for signals in body language, tone, facial expressions, and we test for facts that are brought up earlier in the conversation later on. So we're asking ourselves very simply, does the customer story add up? And then later on in the conversation, does the customer story still add up? Obviously this requires good listening and observation skills, but all of this is trainable. And one thing that we're very conscious is with new members of staff is that they've always got support, and that support extends significantly for the first 3 months of their job, but it's still there for the first year, because these are skills that are naturally honed by learning and doing and living that job for the first year. So in a nutshell, we take the time to understand the customer's needs fully. We do that in a natural, friendly way. And thus, we actually provide, in our view, better customer service, because we understand their requirements, we can put them in the best vehicle that meets their needs. Ultimately, they drive away happy, and so do we. Nora, back to you.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Rob, for that very insightful look at how you have implemented RVSS in your business. And I think as an example of best practice, that is an excellent template. I'm sure lots of you have questions. I can see that one or two of you are typing or have begun to type. just checking that you've pressed the sent button when you've typed your question. But we are looking for a continuous dialogue so we can answer these questions later on. But Rob, please stay on the line because you'll have questions, I'm sure. Moving on now, I'd like to introduce everyone to Barry Fulbrook. He's Director of Corporate Security at Hertz, and he too has some useful advice and insight into his personal involvement in this whole area of counter-terrorism. So Barry, may I ask you to come onto the call?
Good afternoon, Nora. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, can I just say thanks to Terry and Rob for a very comprehensive overview of the rental vehicle security scheme and how you have implemented RVSS in your business. It was very interesting to hear. So I'm Barry Fulbrook. I'm the Director of Corporate Security for Hertz International, based in Uxbridge in West London. So I'm just going to go through 3 or 4 slides. I'm not going to go over the grounds again of what Rob and Terry have given you about RVSS, but I'm just going to give some short overview of what I see as the many benefits of being a member of RVSS. And you'll see on the slide some of the areas which I have personally listed as useful to us. So what I would say is that no matter how good you believe your security processes and procedures may be, working through the security plan forces you to review what you have in place and to consider whether improvements can be made to meet the criteria required. Each of the benefits I show here send a positive message not only to your employees but to your customers and to the public in general. Unfortunately, we are all aware of the horrific attacks that have taken place in recent years, and the vehicle rental industry has sadly featured in a number of the subsequent investigations. Media attention is inevitable, but it may not always provide the full picture of events. For these reasons, I encourage membership of the rental vehicle security scheme to ensure we have a uniform approach to vehicle rental and to show those that have been affected by these terrible incidents that our industry is working together to help as best we can prevent further attacks taking place. So the process of insurance negotiation was never an area that I was previously involved in. However, since the attacks involving rental vehicles, it has become apparent that insurers want to understand the security measures their prospective customers are undertaking to minimise risk. That's their risk. They want to be assured their clients are taking an active approach to security to minimise their risk. At the last meeting I attended with our insurers, I was able to talk about the rental vehicle security scheme, our participation in ACT, that's Action Counter-Terrorism, and the training we provide to our employees. Being able to demonstrate a positive and robust approach to security will be looked upon favourably, and insurers are very interested to hear what measures we and you undertake in your businesses to be as minimal risk to them as possible. So now I just want to quickly talk about step change, which you may or may not have heard of. But before I do so, I'm going to go back one step and first mention Contest, which is the UK government's counter-terrorist strategy. So the aim of Contest is to reduce the risk to the UK and its citizens and its interest overseas from terrorism, so that people can go about their lives freely and with confidence. Contest comprises of 4 strands, also known as the 4 Ps. These are prevent, pursue, protect and prepare. The Step Change programme aims to support delivery of the protect and prepare objectives of the Contest strategy by creating a whole society approach between police, government and the private sector. Within Step Change itself, it comprises of 5 strands, that is 5 sectors, those being transport, travel and tourism, cyber and finance, security and resilience, and crowded places. Each strand is represented by a police chair and a business co-chair. So through the work that the Step Change Board has undertaken, I want to just give you just a brief highlight of some of these. So one of those under the transport sector was in actual fact RVSS, which was launched in December last year. There's also been given guidance to the bus and coach sector on how operators can identify and report suspicious behaviour. In the travel and tourism strand, they look to improve the safety of British citizens overseas and are working with large travel companies to devise a scalable standard of security that can be utilised across the industry. They've actually produced a very handy foldable credit card sized travel guide with many tips on how to keep safe, secure and healthy. Additionally, the Counter-Terrorism Policing, in association with APTA and the Foreign Office, launched a version of Run, Hide, Tell, outlining what to do in the event of an attack abroad. You can find this on the APTA website. The crowded places strand is focused upon protecting people, working within and visiting densely populated places in order to increase the resilience of these areas. And the Action Counter-Terrorism e-learning platform provides, as previously mentioned, valuable training in recognising suspicious behaviour and gaining awareness of counter-terrorism measures. So far, over 1,500 companies have signed up to provide the training to their employees. So this is my final slide, and I want to basically give some details about the Step Change Summit, which is held in Farnborough on the 7th of March, and particularly from a speaker called Egan Murray. Egan Murray is the mother of Martin Hertz, who was one of 22 people murdered when a bomb was detonated at Manchester Arena. Martin's mother gave a very powerful and emotional speech, which began with the words you see within this slide. Everything spoken about in today's webinar is about making the UK a safer place. Preventing just one attack, one more innocent life lost, makes it all worthwhile. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much too, Barry. That was a very powerful image there. I'm moving on now to any questions that delegates might have, and want to draw their attention again. You simply email your question to us. I have one here from a member who's emailed in, and I think this might be one for you, Barry. He'd like to know whether it's best to have a security contact within each branch, as well as having a main security contact and at a head office level. What would be your recommendation?
So to answer that, I would say my first thoughts are that it really depends on how big a company you are, because what you want to try and minimise is the amount of people that potentially the police are trying to reach in the event of a serious incident. I think if you're a smaller company, then maybe that is workable, but particularly in a bigger company where you may have a more organised security structure, then keeping those numbers to a minimal would probably be more beneficial in lessening the amount of time to get through to someone.
I see. Okay. Terry Egan from the DFT, may I ask you to comment on that?
Of course. I very much endorse what Barry just said. I think it very much depends on the size of the organisation, because we do appreciate maybe there are small organisations with maybe 2 or 3 people perhaps in the office running the whole show, and then there's large global multinationals. I think what we decided, or what we thought of initially, would be exactly as Barry had said. You have a security contact that is actually on our register, or we would have that person on our register with the deputy, that actually had the sort of scope to be able to speak on behalf of the company, irrespective of what size that company was. So taking that one step further, it would be maybe a large company with several or many depots. We would sort of envisage, and we're certainly working on this at the moment to see how this will actually work out, but we would certainly envisage having an individual on site, maybe a site manager, that would have some form of training, that would be able to cascade training down to the front of house staff, so that if anyone did have an issue, they would be able to maybe speak to their depot manager or their site manager. That individual would then be able to contact directly the recognised security contact and vice versa. So the idea would be to keep that communication flow, as Barry said, as simple as possible, but we do appreciate that we do need to be able to get information right down to the front line, but we also need to get that information to the directors and what have you right at the top of the business. So it's a case of keeping the communication going and keeping it as simple as we can.
Okay, thank you, Terry. That's very good. I've got a question, I think, for Rob. Rob, how long did it take you to achieve compliance with RVSS? That's from start to finish. Hello, Rob, can you hear me? We may have lost Rob there. So let me go to another question.
Nora? Oh, sorry, it's Barry here.
Barry.
Maybe I can answer that question on behalf of Rob, because I'm sure it probably took him as little time as it did us. I would say from the time we submitted the application and the security plan, I would say it's probably a matter of a couple of days or so for that to be reviewed and then confirmed that everything was appropriate and membership was accepted.
Okay, all right.
Hi, Nora, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. We can, Rob, yes.
Sorry about that. That disconnected momentarily. It's a great question. For us, like Barry, we were involved with the discussions with the FT during the setup of the scheme, but I would say from the time that the Code of Conduct was finalised, it probably took us around 4 to 6 weeks to ensure that our compliance was complete. That included training all of the staff. That was actually the thing that took the longest in terms of ensuring all 50 members of staff achieved the training element. But there were also some technology elements for us as well. But I have to say that, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, already adhering to the BVRLA Code of Conduct was a real help for us, because out of the 10 points, there were only 2 or 3 that needed change, and the change was relatively simple.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine. And dare I ask about the cost of compliance, Rob? Is this onerous financially on small vehicle rental operators?
It wasn't for us, and I would think that the scheme is proportionate in terms of the outlay required. There was no particular capital outlay required for us because we were already looking at implementing some of the items. We're constantly, for example, improving our in-house technology, so those changes were simply put in as part of existing budget. I think the biggest investment was probably the time, but it was time well spent.
Okay, thank you. And just with regards to training, for those of you looking at the screen now, in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, there is access to BVRLA training resource, which is available free of charge. So that, of course, there's a time element, as you said, but in terms of actual resource for implementation, there is a lot of advice and information on the BVRLA website.
And I would certainly endorse that, Nora, if I might just say, because the feedback that we had from our staff on the BVRLA and the ACT training was universally really good. A lot of our staff went into that training quite reticent. They weren't sure how they stood in terms of best practice, and universally that training was praised, so I very much commend that.
Oh, good. Thank you very much for that. I have a question for Terry. Terry, it's been asked, do you have a target number for vehicle operators signing up to RVS? And of course, not asked here, but what happens if the target isn't met?
Again, another good question. In an ideal world, everybody would like all vehicle rental companies, whether they be members of BVRLA or non-members, whatever, we would like them to sign up and be on the register and comply with the code, the 10 points of the code. So realistically, we've set ourselves a sort of 12-month sort of implementation period, a review period, where we will look to see how the scheme is developing, what sort of take-up we're getting. We are working closely with industry via an advisory panel, which will meet regularly in the first year, which is chaired by industry. We as DFT will be obviously at that panel as well, where we will discuss how we think the scheme is going, but equally and even more importantly, we want to hear how businesses are working with the scheme and how it's developing actually on the front line, because this is quite a new area for us, because we are experienced in regulatory security schemes within other transport modes. So as you would expect, aviation, maritime and rail are all regulated when it comes to security. Road transport is regulated, as we know, by the traffic commissioners and the operator licensing system on the sort of roadworthiness side of things and driver's hours. But when it comes to security, it is not sort of regulated apart from dangerous goods in the same way. So we're very much sort of dependent and working with industry to work through systems to see how we can, I don't like potentially to words used compliance, but how can we actually get everyone working in the same direction when it comes to security without having the need to regulate. The bottom line is, if there is a situation that we can evidence in time that would need regulation, then you would expect that, taxpayers would expect it, citizens would expect us to regulate. But I think in the context of the vehicle rental industry, we're very much looking at it being a market-led scheme, it being a beneficial scheme to industry, and also a non-burdensome, or at least burdensome scheme as we can make it. So yes, we do know that it may be quite difficult to get everybody to sign up in the real world, but I'm just as concerned about maybe the small company. The Finsbury Park attack, as you all know, was a small rental company from South Wales, hired the vehicle out, and obviously other situations were larger companies involved. So it goes across the spectrum, so we really need to be able to reach out across the board, really, when it comes to numbers. Okay.
Thank you very much, Terry. I've got another question here from a delegate who's emailed in. What she is suggesting is that sometimes, with the best will in the world, the best customer qualification and security plans that is on offer, sometimes it's not easy to differentiate, let's say, a nervous customer or a vulnerable customer, and that behaviour could be misinterpreted. What if, in those circumstances, an individual was notified to the counter-terrorist authorities and it was a false or incorrect call? Barry, can you advise what would happen if that notification was made and it was purely a nervous customer?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say it's very difficult to make a decision on every person you see. As has been said, not everyone is the same. Some people are more confident than others. And I think if you make a call and you decide that the information you have before you, or something is telling you that something's not right, and you start to dig deeper, by all means call in the hotlines such as Action Counter-Terrorism. No one's going to attribute any blame, but it gives someone else the opportunity to explore some information that you may not have access to. I think also discussing with your colleagues, maybe your manager in the location, to see whether or not there is other information that you can, between you, determine to help you make that decision as to whether or not you're going to rent. You know, it's quite true that the attacks that have taken place, as far as we are aware, they've all been with the utilisation of genuine documents attributable to that individual. So on that principle alone, they've met the criteria in order to be able to rent. It's just, you know, extremely unfortunate and unknown at that time that they went on to commit, you know, these horrendous attacks.
Yep. Okay. Thank you. And Terry, just following up on this point, as members of the advisory panel on RVSS, we did talk about a work stream specifically with the DFT psychologist that we would look into recognising suspicious behaviours. Is that still on the to-do list on your agenda, Terry?
Yes, it is, very much so. As you'll appreciate, there's been some other sort of pressures going on at the moment, but we are certainly, we have engaged with our partners, and we're also engaged internally with, as you say, with the GFT psychologists to look at the suspicious behaviour reporting, because we do understand that it is a very, very difficult situation. I think Rob made some great points earlier on when he was talking about good customer service and good security. We from the centre very much appreciate that you know your customers. The frontline staff know their customers. Now, they may not know them, you know, individually, of course, we know that, but it's that feeling, it's that almost like a sixth sense that you potentially might get. It's something you feel just isn't right. So that is the point where I think I made the point about talking to the manager, talking about the on-site supervisor to discuss the issue, and then decide how he wants to move that forward within the company. There's certainly going to be no, it's a confidential service, there is no sort of redress on the individual for reporting it, but I think it's just something that we can only make those types of decisions ourselves, and if there's something that you really are not happy about, I think you'd probably be happier in passing that information on, even if it were to turn out to be a nervous customer, because that person, if it was a nervous customer, the security services would not, you know, be interested in that person. But it's something that, if it's worrying the individual, I think that would be the point to pass that information on.
Okay, thank you. So, Rob, is there anything else you'd like to add to that? You were at the forefront, I think, there of your customer service training and how you train people to engage with customers and to, I suppose, talk about what their customer needs might be. Have you any insight into picking up suspicious behaviours?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that unfortunately there isn't a list of suspicious behaviours that we can call upon. If there was, then the job would be a lot easier. I think what has already been said has summed it up beautifully. It's about engaging in knowing your customers' needs, understanding their story of why they need to hire your vehicle, so that you can offer them the best vehicle for their needs. And some customers are naturally nervous when they're hiring perhaps a different class of vehicle than they're used to driving. And that's something that we do listen for as part and parcel of what we do. But by keeping it as natural as possible, you are more likely to throw up the very occasional customer who is disingenuous and does struggle because they're struggling to have a natural conversation with you. And as Terry mentioned, it's often a sixth sense, it's an instinct that's honed with time. And it can't, unfortunately, be crystallised down into a document in black and white. But what the training has done, and the Action Counter-Terrorism training has helped with, is to give our rental agents and our drivers and our handover agents confidence to tell someone within the business and know who to tell when they're not sure about a customer. And it's about them having the confidence to do that, to do it quickly and to do it reliably. And then we hand over that information to government, and then it really is over to them.
Yes, thank you, Rob. I think probably also the role of the manager and the support within a branch or an operation is absolutely key too. Well, everyone, we're reaching the end of our webinar. For those of you who are still emailing in questions, we will address those questions and we'll get back to you with a summary of what's taken place. There is guidance. Some of you are asking about guidance. This is BVRLA guidance, which is available on our website, and it's available free of charge. We have the BVRLA e-learning platform, which can actually evidence that your staff have undergone the training, and a certificate is provided on successful assessment. We've also got a self-assessment. How would you appraise the security of your particular operation, whether it's a branch or a head office environment? And this is available for download too. It's a useful starting point for a security plan. If I were to summarize today's session, I think it's clear to say that we have a lot of experience managing risks associated with all the normal things, fraud and general crime. And we've got a good tradition of working with the law enforcement organisations and of sharing information and best practice. We can simply go on in that vein, but it's far more useful to reappraise our respective organisations and to look again, what else can we do to support the DFT's initiative here for the rental vehicle security scheme? Because, we are all part of a community. We should be presenting a united front to look at the threat of counter-terrorism and give that powerful message, look, go elsewhere. Our defences are pretty good. I'm going to close then with this particular slide on how we can defeat terrorism and how you can overcome your fear of not wanting to get involved, or how you might be wrong. Hopefully we've allayed some of those fears this afternoon. To tell you that we've got specific advice and information. If you want to call us or email us, we are there and available to help members in this area. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone, you the delegates, for participating this afternoon. I'd like to thank you, Terry Egan, for coming all the way from London to present. I'd also like to thank Rob. I'm glad Stockport is sunny. And I'd like to thank you, Barry, for giving us some useful insight into what you've learnt following the attack in 2017 on your particular operation. If you have any colleague who'd like to participate and wasn't able today, the good news is you can listen again by simply clicking on a link which we'll be sending you out tomorrow. And of course you can see what you thought of the webinar. And I'd like to thank you all very much for this afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope your operations will benefit. Thank you all very much.